And a very good evening to you, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. Whether you are in Guyana, the United States of America, Canada, any part of North America, Europe, or whether you are in the wider Caribbean, welcome to Politics 101 as we begin our countdown to emancipation this weekend. I think everyone would be in that mood. But before we get to emancipation later on in the week on Thursday, tonight we want to focus on coalition politics, the future of coalition politics. And we think it's a timely topic because we are approaching 1 year since the coming to power of the PPP and the fall of the coalition government that lasted from 2015 to 2020. And so we are going to try to tease out some questions tonight with a power pack panel. We have Dr. Henry Jeffrey, political scientist and political commentator, Mr. Sharma Solomon of Linden, former regional chair of Region 10, Takuma Ogunse, who's appearing for the first time on Politics 101, executive member of the WPA, and Kemraj Ramjatan, who is the leader of the Alliance for Change. And both Kemraj and Ogunse were actively involved in the coalition government, the APNU AFC coalition government. Let me start with you, Henry, as the political scientist, and to give us an overview of coalition politics in Guyana. We know that in 1964 to 68, we had a coalition government of the PNC and the United Force. And then, of course, the recent APNU AFC coalition. In the wider Caribbean, in Trinidad, we have had a couple of experiences there of coalition government. There were a couple of times elections, they were tied, and we had coalition government. We had the People's Partnership in St. Kitts. We have St. Kitts Nevis. We have Team Unity, which is coming to the end of its first term. But give us an overview of coalition politics in the Caribbean.
Well, David, I actually I think that you will be better placed to speak to the Caribbean as a whole, because I think you do that every day. And I have not placed much attention what's happening in the Caribbean, largely because Guyana is not the Caribbean. Guyana has a specific kind of problem that does not exist in the Caribbean. Guyana has almost a bicommunal country of two ethnicities at a loggerheads for ever so long, and it demands different kind of approaches. But coalition, and because of that, I will tell you that it is possible. It's not structural or institutional, but certainly it's possible to see the coming together of Bornum and Jagan as a kind of coalition in the first place. Remember, Jagan and Swan, they were forming a PPP, but Jagan recognizing that he cannot win the urban population because the UDP and all these people were there, and then he wanted some African person to be, with him in the party, and the result is that they found a Bornum in London, and that would be part of the problem that has led to the breaking up of the PPP, because Bornum was promised that he will be the chairman. But by the time he returned and more had happened, Jagan became very, very popular. And the result, he thought that chairman meant leader. By the time he came, the situation had changed in terms of the dynamics of Guyanese politics. I'm talking here about people who have done this research. And essentially, what has happened, they said, well, there's a difference between leader and the chairman of the party. So problems started immediately as to, and led in at the end, indeed, to the split in the PPP. Uh, so that was a kind of coalition. But institutionally, you had the UDP and the PNC coming down to about 1950, what,
57.
1957. Well, no, they went to the election of 57, but that happened maybe around 56, 55. No, they went to the 57 election as PNC, PPP, Bornamite, and Jaganite.
Yes.
Then after that, Bornam tried to form this arrangement with the UDP, and that came about for them. That did not come about. Yes, that came about for them to go to 61 election.
Yes.
Together. So that occurred. And then Bornam and that grouping, calling themselves now PNC, went to the 1964 election with the UF, United Force. For all sorts of reasons, of course, we can get into the nitty-gritty of what took place there. But essentially, for all sorts of reasons, Bornam thought that the guy was a capitalist, and Bornam always himself some sort of a socialist. They used to call him Guyana, wrote somewhere that they used to call him Young Tito, meaning Tito of Yugoslavia, which was not what we're going to call the straight line Marxist-Leninist, but a sort of independent socialist. And he wanted to make his own way across and do his own thing. And he thought that Digar and so on was too much of a capitalist. And therefore, he manipulated the elections and got rid of Digar. And the result is, we can go into all the problems around that period. And then we came to the 1992 elections after that, because they were there for 30 years and so on. We can discuss all of that. But in 1992, the PPP thought it had to have the PPP Civic, Sama is myself, other people there again. It was not a group, and but they thought they had to have other people there with them, to win certain levels of support and in Guyana, and that occurred. And after that, of course, the Civic has remained with the PPP, but we came to 2011, where there was this coalition. Well, now we just stopped being the PNC. We start having the APNU by then, including other parties such as your party, David, the WPA. And by 2015, well, they did quite well, because in 2011 they held the PPP. Now the PPP could win the plurality. That's why the plurality in a plural society is a problem, and we may speak to that up the road. But they won the PPP won the plurality, but did not win the majority in the parliament, and the result of that was prorogation by the Mr. Ramatar and all that sort of a thing. And then we came to 2020, the elections there. No, 2015. We came to 2015, where, because I'm pointing these things out because they're important. I said the plurality was something, but this thing that you can't have post-election coalition is another problem that we will have to deal with, because you cannot have that, you have a situation where the AFC and the PPP got the PNC got together and the PPP was out of office, and then you came to 2020. I don't think that there is the same kind of arrangement. So overall, we have had throughout Guyana's history there been coalition. There have been a sort of coalition politics, and I think this is largely because it is not only a numerical issue, because if perhaps Jagan could have won the election alone in 1992, but it's a perception issue. It has a lot to do with how people feel about the government that's coming into office, and therefore we have these are issues. It will continue to be. It will continue to be so, because now we have effectively moved to a society where nobody's got a majority. The PPP doesn't have an ethnic majority anymore. As I said, there are 30 something percent, 39.8 or something like that percent. So nobody has ethnic majority anymore, and to pass that line, you will certainly need to have some sort of coalition. The problem is there is how you're going to get to that. You can get there by 2020, massive, maybe on both sides. Maybe it's only that the PPP end up winning, but not any manipulation of the elections to get over the 50%. They are trying to diminish the historical development. The historical development says nobody is now essentially has what we can call an ethnic majority, and therefore you have to live with coalitions. But maybe it's too early because we are now moving there, but people still believe that they can do all sort of jiggery-poogery to get to the 50% mark. And that is the problem here. We have got to stop that from happening, force the political system to live more like Suriname, in a multi-ethnic society in which every one of us can have a say. Not you're going to manipulate my votes out to play. We got to say PPP or PNC, I don't care. You're not going to manipulate my votes out to play. So that's my little overview. But there are many things in that little mecha, as we say, that needs to be discussed.
Muted myself. Yeah, thank you very much, Henry, for that overview. And I'm very glad that you went as far back as 1953 to make the salient point that from that point onwards, we have had one form of coalition politics or another. One of the chief architects of that 1953 thing has argued that the 53 was really a coalition, and that it wasn't given enough time to mature, and so that was one of the reasons that it broke down. In fact, Guyana and Martin Carter in 1953 had proposed PPP not try to win the election, and give the coalition some time. But you also make the point about the motivation for coalition politics. And one has to do with numbers, but two has to do with perception, the multi-ethnic perception. Let me go to Cameron Ramjatan, who was actually part of the coalition, was an architect of the coalition. His party, the AFC, came into being around or about 2006. And they said specifically that they were not going to join with one side or the other. In fact, Kemraj is dogged still by that famous statement that if you join one side or the other, you're going to be dead meat. 10 years later, they did join. And so what I want to ask Kemraj, what changed between 2006 and 2015 that motivated the AFC to make that leap?
Well, it's the pragmatism of the Alliance for Change and its leadership, which, of course, is a collective like the WPA. It is not, a monopoly in one man. It is not a monopoly in one woman. And that was the liberal nature of our leadership, that notwithstanding my personal opinion that we are going to have problems if we were to join up with one of the two parties, because of course there was talk that we could speak to Donald Ramutar, who had sent out some emissaries to talk to us. And of course, we were also talking to, via Raphael Trotman, to some of the PNC that by that time had become the APNU, by virtue of WPA and a number of other organizations, politically organizations, joining up. So after realizing that from 2006, you served a 5-year period, the corruption was still getting greater, more increasing, low local government elections, constitutional reform, absolutely nothing. And then, of course, an arrogance on the part of the PPP, giving the impression that it is the political monopoly in Guyana. And then seeing some success in 2011 by virtue of a number of other people voting for the Alliance for Change, having an additional 2 seats from the 5 that it got in 2006. I did what is called some surveys as to whether, if we were to join up, we can win an elections and change the political game. Because once you have a split opposition to the extent of it creating, first of all, a majority, or if not a plurality, it will still mean that executive power will reside in the PPP. I wanted to shift that. And in the process of seeing the surveys, talking to sugar workers, talking to a number of workers that we know generally had joined up with a PPP, and they were saying that it is time for some changes and they are going to support it, I decided, like a true pragmatist, why not give it a shot? And especially a number of my leading members, almost all of them excepting 2, had indicated that we should give it a shot. I behaved like the arbiter and wanted to hear their views. And indeed, when I heard the arguments, I decided that indeed we should give it a shot. And my surveys also indicated that we are going to narrowly win. The other thing that helped motivate me into moving away from the dead meat kind of a argument that I'd put forward before was the fact that David Granger was, in my opinion, a good, honest leader. And that, after 5 years in Parliament with him, or thereabouts, it was the 2011 to 2014 period when we were a majority in the opposition and the government was a minority. I, as leader of the Alliance for Change, and David, we talked plenty together. We knocked it off on very many issues. I noticed that he was a very extensive reader, something that I liked, and the fact that he was talking the kind of language that I wanted to hear when it came to what we need to do for the country. And it is not just a means to an end, but to ensure that it will be a means now of, when winning government, to do a couple of things that could change and Guyana and transform it. And that is one of the other motivating factor. The other third one would be that we saw tremendous support for this thing from our ground support, as I mentioned. And so that was it. I decided that why not? Let us work out an accord. We did the Cummingsburg Accord, and we managed to win an elections based on it. We drafted out what it is that we are going to do whilst in government. We indicated our objectives. and it was a lot of things. And then when you started that coalition building, when talking to Granger and his team, and they talking to us, and we also talking to other people inside of the Granger team, like Takuma and you and a whole set of other people, you realizing that this is the way forward. We need to find a way to talk to each other if we are to have any chance of bridging the divide that Henry just mentioned. And we need to allow ourselves to see this tribal adversarialism as something that we can overcome and transcend as Guyanese. And so we must engage in this common enterprise all the time. Just like we lost the 2020 elections in very disputed circumstances and all of that. But that does not mean that coalition building should not be part and parcel of our construction of a new Guyana.
And of course, we will expand on that as we go.
Yeah, that's right. So I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you certainly did. Do we have Takuma Ogunse on? Takuma, let's step back a little bit, because before we had the APNU AFC coalition, we had the formation of the APNU, principally a union between the PNC and the WPA. Despite the fact that there were other forces, those were the two principal forces. What is it that motivated your party, the WPA, to make the leap to enter into a coalition, basically with a party that you had really adversarial relationship going back to the 1970s?
Firstly, you hear me?
Yes, we are hearing you.
Firstly, the WPA have always, even before 2011, in previous elections, we enter coalitions with the Guyana Labour Party. We enter coalition with the Amerindian Party headed by what the chap name again? Can't remember. Hardy. Point I'm trying to make is that the WPA had in its political evolution, understanding that in light of the reinforced dominance by the two major parties, that to defeat them, other smaller parties will have to find a way of collaborating in order to give themselves some political relevance, and to use that relevance to eat into the support of those two major parties. But going to 2011, you remember the WPA for many years have worked with the PPP when the PNC was in power, particularly in the Burnham and the Hoyt period. We tried to build the PCD, the Patriotic Coalition for Democracy, with the hope that that organization would enter into the elections in 1992 as a coalition. And we were hoping that with that intervention, we would be able to address some of the fears that the ethnic group had about each other. The African community was very fearful of a PPP-dominated government, and the Indian community, with their experience of the Burnham domination, had the justifiable fears. But we felt that if we were able to enter the elections as the PCD, we would go on a large way in beginning to address that problem and to create more political space and dynamism in the body politics of the country. But you know that didn't happen. And in 1992, the country saw a return to the old politics. In fact, the WPA was a little more in political terms destroyed, because the country demonstrated it had no real solid multiracial constituency that could stand up to those two larger parties. And the WPA from 92 had to enter into some political realism. I remember going into 1992 elections, some people even thought the WPA could win the elections, even though we never felt that way. But of course, we felt we would have done extremely well. And we get less than probably about 2% of the votes, which demonstrate that the country, okay, returned to its old ways. And we saw the come to power of the PPP. Unfortunately, Dr. Jagan died before his completion of his term of office, and we see the rise of Bara Jagdeo. And what was significant in the Jagdeo period, from the WPA point of view, is that, and I want to say this because when Jagdeo came to power, I remember Brother Guyana in the executive was saying that we must give the young man a chance. You know, he seems to have had a lot of faith that Jagdeo should be given a chance, that he may bring something different to the table. There were other opinions, and I personally was not convinced. I didn't feel that Jagdeo had the experience. I have never seen Jagdeo in a picket line. He was never harassed by the police. As far as I know, he never spent a minute in a police lockup. And I felt that the challenges that this country has, Jagdeo was not politically developed enough to lead the country out of the dilemma. But as everything else, one have to be political optimistic, and you give him a chance to see what he would do. But to make a long story short, what became extremely clear to us, that Jagdeo was steeped in the old PPP politics, and he was prepared to play the race game. He wasn't prepared to offer the country a solution that the WPA felt was necessary, a shared governance solution. We became convinced that Jagdeo is behaving just like any other PPP leader, and he's playing games with the race, and he wants to build a PPP domination, political domination in the country. We also look at his economic policies, and we saw clearly a deliberate attempt to marginalize the African community, the way in which he treats the public servants, refused to permit collective bargaining, and at the same time allow GAU to exercise that right. And they reached a point where sugar workers is one of the highest paid workers in the country, and the public sector workers, where Africans have a significant number, was the poorest paid in the entire region. And that led to the impoverishment of African households and African communities. And added to that, we saw the rise of the criminal state. And the more disgusting aspect of it is when we begin to see the state sponsors killings. And every time you open the papers, you see 4 and 5 young black men, executed. There was Roger Luncheon who described the killers as phantoms. And we became convinced that the PPP is on a road that we have to put a stop to. And we believe that as a party, we have spent a lot of political energies in defense of the Indian community against Burnham excesses and Hoyt excesses. And we felt that political justice meant that the WPA should use whatever political power it has to make sure that the PPP understand, look, you can't manipulate us because of the Rodney assassination, because of our historic struggle with the PPP. We understand that at this historical moment that the African community need political defense, and we are prepared to provide that defense. And we saw that defense as a defense of the nation, because we felt that to the extent to which African politics is strengthened, we have a better chance to develop in the national political space a political discourse that will lead to shared governance and address some of the fundamental differences in the political equation. And those are the factors that forced us to reconcile with the PNC And of course, Corbyn was of a similar mood. And the end of it all, we eventually struck the APMU. So those were the kind of things that motivate us.
Thank you very much, Takumo Gunse. Given the WPA's perspective there, we heard from Kemraj, who gave the AFC perspective, and they are coming from two of the three major parties that made up the AP and UFC coalition. Let me bring in the young man among us, Sharma Solomon. He is younger, but he's old enough to remember the experience going into first the APNU and the AFC. As a young political person, first of all, did you at the time support the APNU, formation of the APNU, and then the APNU AFC, and why? Or why not? Unmute, you have to unmute.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you for having me on, Dr. Hines. And to your other panelists, it's good to be in your company, and to the rest of Guyana, happy emancipation. I don't believe emancipation was a day. I think it was a moment. So the entire moment leading up to that would have also included none. So to the rest of Guyana, happy emancipation. Yes, I think the calling for me into politics as a young person, I think more so as a young progressive, in recognizing the politics and where the body politic was at the time. It is not to be taken for granted as my age. I think Dr. Jeffrey gave a very good perspective of many of the attempts made as far back as the 50s and 60s of coalition politics. And that, not to be taken for granted at my age, is that we were paying attention. We were paying attention to persons like myself who have expressed and shown a desire of participating and to be more involved in politics. I think we were paying attention since then as to what coalition politics mean for Guyana, what it meant, what it can do, and where we can play a part. So I think but I know the advent of the APNU, having a relationship myself with the PNC, was the icing on the cake for many progressives who, whether it was the young people or even older persons who would always wanted to see a more coming together sort of big tent politics. But just to go back to Dr. Jeffrey's point, we were paying attention. And what we actually saw, in fact, what myself and others would have experienced, is every time there is an extreme desire or weariness in the society of one-party politics, where we see the domination of a particular political ideology over the society, there is that interest to move beyond that, to involve others in terms of ideas and whatever substance they want to bring to the body politic. And you saw that desire being more extreme when it became the issue of the removal of the PPP. So the success, and I'll go back, the success in the 60s saw the coalition of the PNC and the TUF. I think outside of everything else, it was that desire. I'll come to the relationship just in a minute. And we got that desire again in 2015. But that desire started to show its relevance even as far back as 2006 in the advent of the AFC. And it expressed itself to bring a minority government in 2011 when you saw the APNU. So in that particular era of coming together politics, where we saw the third party of the AFC, and we saw the PNC through then leader Robert Corbyn making a very bold step to move to have an APNU umbrella that welcomed even a WPA despite the differences. Now we come to that. Though that desire to remove the PPP is what is very expressive, even at this moment, in coalition politics. I think the lasting relationship of coalition politics have always been the victim of the structures within which coalition politics is to function and the ideology on which it is built. Those structures, for example, Guyana is a parliamentary democracy. Guyana is a hybrid in terms of structure. We have a presidential system. It is very difficult to see coalition politics not having the sort of room if you have these structures that maintain its dominance over the ideas of other parties. So whether that's a parliamentary structure or presidential structure, you have structures, as Kemraj mentioned earlier, which would be things like an accord, whether it's the Commonsburg Accord. Those are structures that build relationship, and I think those are some of the things that may have contributed to coalition politics appearing as though it may not work. Ideology. So we may have parties coming from different backgrounds. Tested among its leadership would be different ideas. But I think many times we don't see how much we articulate those ideas in society. For example, you see the PNC and the AFC, or in fact the APNU and the AFC coming together for coalition politics on an accord. But ideologically, you see, or in fact you saw many differences that strain the relationship of coalition politics. And I believe that for me as a young person, building from what the APNU came in 2011 with, and saw how it attempted to ideologically see where it can work with the WPA. For example, we look at a working class issue ideologically, where Professor Clive Thomas of the WPA promoted cash grants. That's to get the working people involved. But do we see those ideologies coming together when you have a coalition? Many times it's strained. And I think as a young person, when we saw the APNU coming together, we saw an attempt to not allow those strained issues that affect the relationship of coalition politics, such as structures and ideology, to in the long run affect how we come out in future elections. And I think that fundamentally needs to be dealt with as we pursue further coalition politics outside of the political elite and those who are in charge of the parties. I think those things should be filtered to the wider society. How these structures are going to ensure that coalition politics work. Whether you will have a dominant individual that nevertheless you have an accord, or you have a pact that is made, it holds no relevance. Whether it is you say that in the coalition, for example, the prime minister will chair cabinet, the structure of our nation don't allow for that. The constitution don't allow for that. So those structures must be explained to the people also outside of the leadership, so that they can understand what coalition politics is. We must understand what the ideologies are outside of the people who know in the political elite, how they're going to ensure those ideologies manifest themselves into policies that are going to help those people. And I think that is what we have to look at. My party, and just to add a bit, my party, the PNC, because I notice you have persons from other parties.
Yes.
And I don't want to to change that desire. In looking at the PNC, that desire, and Dr. Jeffrey would have mentioned earlier, have always existed. Whether people want to question the sincerity of it or not, we are here today speaking coalition politics because of the efforts of the PNC and where they have placed coalition politics with regards to 2011 and 2015, APNU, and coming together of the AFC.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Sharma, for raising very important questions. The question, you've really touched on what are the challenges of coalition politics in general and in Guyana in particular. And I'm going to ask the political scientists among us to really zero in on that as we try to take an objective look the experience of the coalition government. As I said at the beginning, that this move towards coalition government went on in Trinidad and Tobago with the People's Partnership from 2010 to 2015. It's going on right now in St. Kitts, Nevis, with the Team Unity, where two political parties came together and formed the government. So it's not isolated. And in Suriname, our neighbor, it is much more entrenched. We're going to take a short break and do some PSAs. And when we come back, Dr. Jeffrey is going to zero in on the challenges generally of coalition government, and in particular, the recent APNU AFC coalition.
Please help keep Politics 101 on social media and broadcast television. If you are in North America, please donate via Cash App or PayPal.
If you are in Guyana and the Caribbean and don't have access to Cash App and PayPal, email your pledge to dhines6106@aol.com and we will direct you how to get your donation to us. Thank you in advance for your donation.
Thank you very much, and thanks to those of you who have joined us a little bit late, and those of you who've been from the beginning. We're discussing coalition politics tonight. We have a packed guest list, and we spent the first part of the program really trying to get from three of the participants here what motivated them to join with the larger formation to form the APNU AFC. And Henry, you heard Sharma Solomon. He raised the question of challenges. He cited ideology, which is very important. He cited the question of the winner-take-all political architecture and trying to do coalition politics within those contexts. As I listened to him, I was wondering whether you were still at UG when he got there. But anyhow, speak to us about the challenges and how those did or did not affect coalition.
Well, thank you very much. And first of all, generally, coalition in a normal situation breaks down largely because the two parties, two or three parties, are making an attempt to ensure that no one of them gains at the advantage of the other. Like normally in a homogeneous society, what happens is that we are struggling for power in a competitive framework where people are changing their positions all the time. Today I can be for the Labour Party, tomorrow I can be for the Conservative Party, and so on, depending upon the issue. And therefore, normally what the parties in that coalition are trying to do is to maintain and perhaps improve upon their support base. All the parties are trying to do that. And that's the strain it puts on the coalition can lead to all sorts of breaking up. Now, in Guyana, you have a different situation altogether. You don't have an homogeneous country. As I normally say in Guyana, you don't have a people. You have different people. There's not a united public opinion. You show me one issue, excepting perhaps the border issue, where we start, that we have a united public opinion on. Anything you raise politically, people divide according to ethnicity for the most part. So you do not have that. So what you have, it's coalition. Normally, the best coalition perhaps it will be if Guyana is to move forward, although it has its dangers, might be for the coalition for some kind of shared governance. Because essentially everybody knows what their constituency is and can defend that constituency in the executive situation. They are not depending, no ethnic group is depending for some small party or the other to defend them. The people they have faith in are there at the table to defend their position. So when people come out and say this is wrong and that is wrong, essentially they would be criticizing their own representatives. Now, in our situation, when you have, look at the AFC coalition, and I am one, for instance, who I never used to pay much mind to the AFC because comrades used to say, we will never join, and we'll never join, and all that thing. And I used to say, but I cannot, first of all, the AFC never used to speak to shared governance. And secondly, they used to say they'll never join. But by the time we came, after 2011, I joined with others to keep pressuring them that according, Solomon says it, according the nature of the structure of Guyana, which says that you cannot have post-election coalition, means that you have to join before. You have to come together before now. And therefore, if you have a government in power for 23 years and you have all sorts of problem with that government, and the way to get it out is, electorally at least, to get it out, is to make 51% of the vote. You must join before election. Now, you note, going back to Solomon's problem, what that means. When you join before, you become the same party almost. You are not like in the homogeneous society where we are struggling with each other as a coalition. You're not in that sort of arrangement anymore. You are almost a single party. So one of the first structural things one must do is to see to it two things: that you should not have any plurality, because that's a major problem too, as Ashama was pointing out. That's a major problem, because if you can get 25% of the votes and win the presidency in Guyana, and essentially win the executive. If no other party gets more than that, you have sufficient party and you get less than 25%. It might make sense if the idea was to share governance in a democratic society, but it makes no sense if effectively you want to hold on to total power. So effectively, what has occurred is that you have that as number one, and then you have the situation when you don't have post-election coalition. Post-election coalition means that when you are in the coalition, you have serious power. You can say to the people you're collating with, I'm walking. I can join the other man. I can do all of that. You have serious power. Therefore, the structure of what is taking place is of major importance. And that's why, if you are going to talk, as we normally do nowadays, constitutional reform, this discourse, that's why when I came on here and we were speaking off here, I said, you raise a very important issue here, largely because it raises the question of what it is, how we see Guyana of the future. You can't go into say you're going to have any kind of reform, as a matter of fact, constitution, nothing, if we haven't got some idea clearly about where we think Guyana is going. And if, as I believe, naturally, given that no party today has a majority, and they are all getting less in terms of minorities, naturally we are moving into a multi-ethnic society, more or less like Suriname. And therefore that should be our direction. And if we are going to make the necessary changes, if we are going to go down the road of being a multi-ethnic society, a democratic multi-ethnic society, coalition politics is the answer, just like how it's answer in Suriname. And it needs major structural changes, constitutional and electoral, as we go forward. And I'm going to tell you that the plurality system needs to go. You need to have more direct members of parliament elections. I think I pointed out that you can have as many as 75% of the people in parliament. If you want to keep the PR system, I don't have a problem with that, particularly if you have what we call an open PR list. I have no problem. But 75% of the members of parliament can be related directly, can be responsible and have more, or let me put it this way, the constituency can have control over 75% of the members of parliament, far more now than the party hierarchy are controlling all these people. You need to do that. You need also to ensure that anybody can wake up and say, I want to run for the presidency, and the system should be simple. In Guyana, it's simple. The two parties, I don't know if they came together and make this agreement because it certainly suits them. If you as a political party, a small party wants to get in, you have to run in 6 regions and you have to have umpteen people. Since you don't pay any money now, there's no deposit that you can lose. You have to have hundreds of people signing you up in regions that you have never gone to. Now, that might sound reasonable, but when you are moving into a multi-ethnic society, it is not reasonable at all. So, Guyana, I'm saying it again, is not a normal society, homogeneous society. It's a society without a public opinion. There's a public opinion in nothing. Don't matter what the PPP do, certain people will always support it. But no matter what the PNC do, certain people will always support it. Mill says in 1861 that when a situation like that exists, you can't have representative government. You can't have democratic government. It's only in the 60s and 70s that people start believing that in forms of shared governance and forms of electoral arrangements can allow that to happen. So this is a very complicated situation.
Yeah, but Henry, we've had the experience of the APNU AFC coalition. Any lessons to be drawn from that experience? Positive, negative?
Well, yes. First of all, I don't agree with Solomon here that, man, under Chedi, when you get into these informal arrangements as they did about who should manage who should chair the cabinet, anybody can chair the cabinet. Under Chedi Jagan, they used to rotate it. Chedi used to rotate it every week. Anybody chair the cabinet. And if you make an informal agreement, you should stick to it. It's informal. You know everything about what the Constitution said beforehand. So there's no way you're going to sign to something. It's either you're trying to fool the people or you're trying to fool the party or you're trying to fool both. You are the one that signed this thing that said Moses. And there was absolutely nothing wrong with that. Who wants to chair cabinet anyway? It's boring. The point is that you are the president and you have certain other responsibilities. You have to chair the problem. The lesson is, again, I go back, because you have to join in the you have to join in the pre-election time. Moses and the AFC could not pick up themselves and say, we gone, not easily, and we gone and join the PPP and throw you out. You promised this, and you are doing something else. So it's not easy. Your system would have fallen apart, no doubt, and we might have gone back because you would have won the plurality and they would have been voting against you in parliament where you can't get bills and all that sort of a thing. So it taught us that system, if you really want coalition government to work, that system should go. But the PNC did all sort of thing, or the APNO, that, in my view, suppress the AFC. I mean, come on. If you are in a coalition and you want the AFC, your job in a coalition like they're in, your job was really to say, listen, AFC might attempt to take vote from me and might be able to do some, but we want them to take votes from the PPP. And because this is an ethnic situation, this is not normal. You want them to take votes from the PPP. Your job was to do things that would help them do that, not do things that would destroy them. 7,000 sugar workers. What do you think they mean to the AFC? When you did that, what do you think it meant? No, the Moses thing had already diminished them in the eyes. When you do that, what do you think it did? And they are supposed to go in those communities and talk. I don't care what the AFC say, because they're in a coalition, they'll try to make a excuse. But you only got to be logical and sensible to say that can't help them. Could not have helped them. And so, but that is a political level. What I'm saying at the practical level, if they had the opportunity to walk from that coalition, that's easy, that issue might never have occurred. That decision might never have occurred because you'd have to think twice in the coalition about whether or not you can do. Look at the thing about shared governance. And now I'm going to your party, David. Oh, look, umpteen thing Hoganzai writing about shared governance. Where was it? Yeah, the WPA has always been for shared governance. But where is it? You were supposed to do that in 6 months. Nobody was never even given a reason for you not doing it. Nobody. And therefore, the people in the WPA dancing all over the place saying, oh, PPP don't want it. But who cares if the PPP want it? Your job is to put it on the table. Put it on the table and let them say they don't want it. Not for you to be walking around saying they want it. It was quite clear that you didn't want that. The coalition government didn't want it. So that's why I said, as we go forward, this thing got to be reformed structurally. It has to be reformed sensibly. If we intend to live in a country that is ruled by coalition politics. If, as we have now, everybody trying to get 51%, well, everybody going to try to manipulate elections to get back there. Well, there's another ball game altogether.
Well, that's why I have the professor on tonight to throw the gauntlet down and to, in a sense, raise the questions in a neutral way. But Kemraj and Takuma have got to put you all in the hot seat. Kemraj, what were the upsides, what were the downsides of the coalition experience?
Well, in a normal one unitary party like the PPP, you are going to have your problems just like you would have had your problems when the PNC was in government. And we must not then be so emphasizing of these problems to the extent of the larger picture. I was a member of the PPP government. I was a parliamentarian. And I know that inside there are vast differences. The political calculus of being in government is an extraordinary thing because a number of lobbying goes on for you want better things for happening in Berbice, you want better things happening for Region 10, you want for the Amerindians and so on. And then the resources are not there. And then you can have major disagreements. But when you do have the major disagreements, you must have a practical governance method that, notwithstanding the disagreements, you must not then go on to expel people out of the party because that can break it up. And that is exactly what you can have in a unitary party. And that's also the danger in a coalition arrangement. So don't feel that that which is going to happen uniquely only with coalition doesn't happen inside of other unitary parties, as it were. We have seen what Jagdeo has done in relation to other people inside of the PPP, and they're literally taking it on. Inside of the AFC, you have major disagreements on matters of policy in relation to a number of things. However, once you live the democratic style and the liberal style, you can have the people still being accommodating, I still respecting their views, they're respecting mine, other leaders coming up with some very strong views, which then changes how I think as leader and other people think as leader, just like that dead meat kind of arrangement. When the power of the argument and the surveys show that, yes, we can take government, then you will be real silly not to then change and be pragmatic about it. Now, inside of the APNU FC coalition, I must say that the argument was made by Winston Jordan that too much bloody money is going into the sugar estates. And I, for one, although I knew that we did have a lot of support in some of the sugar estate areas, I'll tell you honestly, and I speak here to my good professor friend there, that it is important that decisions have to be made. You're not going to fragment a cabinet because you feel that it is going to hamper your support base inside of the estate areas with a couple thousand votes that manage to make you win. You are there in 5-year periods to do that which you think is right. And I believe that, yes, we did the right thing. We did not sell it properly. We did not promote it. Today, you can see how much monies are being spent in a black hole and all of that. And the sugar workers themselves are realizing the mistake that they probably made in the 2020 elections. But mistakes like that, you cannot really find a solution to it. The ideals of ensuring that whilst in government that you win another elections are not long lasting, because you have to make decisions. And even if you don't make the decision, somebody inside of your party can say, well, y'all are doing bare nonsense. You don't want to make the right decision. You want to pour money behind sugar workers. What happens to the public servants? And then you can get a fragmentation there. And that is what was happening. So these are lessons. And I want to make the point that, look, there will be tremendous imperfections about coalition, just like that there are tremendous imperfections in a unitary party that has won the majority or the plurality. They're going to have problems. It is how you lead and how you, as leaders there, manage these differences and then collectively come to the median level and work it out to the extent that this is going to be better for us rather than a major fragmentation. And that is what I tried as best to do, because I didn't have very much experience in coalition building. And that is why I used to talk in Parliament, in Parliament, and also inside of the cabinet. Because, you know, I use the example, the walker asked, but where is the path? And then the philosopher said, the path is created by walking. Let's just walk it. Okay, we will know. Then we will find some hurdles. We will have to then pass them and so on. And that's the evolution of society. I am an internal optimist. I know that we're going to make fundamental errors because other countries that have lived the democratic life, they make plenty problems. Germany got its own problem. You got homogenous societies too, got major problem. You got problems inside the CARICOM countries that are largely homogenous. You know, we got our peculiar problems, and we got to walk the walk to find out how we must do the talking too. And so it is important in that context. I do not want to emphasize the disagreements we had, but they were all courteous. And I think they were managed very wisely by David Arthur Granger. I was very impressed with that. He's soft-spoken, not the type that is aggressive like me and so on, and who will tell people to haul their tails and things like that. He was very, you know, courteous to the extent of managing that which could fragment. And that is why I feel that that is about the best way. But we will always have major disagreements because that is the nature of this course that we run as politicians. I would want certain things. He would not want certain things. The resources are not there from the finance ministry to execute on certain things. You want the police force to get better arrangements. You want your firearms, your fire department to get more fire engines, this, all manner of things. But and then when you go now to the poor man at the Ministry of Finance, he said, boss, we gotta wait for this oil money, you know. Let's see how best we can do it. And that is what happens. And even though we might have big set of money coming into the oil monies, how it is managed is also going to create massive disagreements. As we have seen already, there are factions inside of the PPP that are saying operationalize the oil monies that is in the Federal Reserve Bank in one way and proceed to let the people enjoy the monies. Jagdeo and Ashney don't want to do that. They want to amend the law for the Kazakhstan model. And that is a lot of bull, quite frankly. And so they're going to have their problems in there too. Same thing with the COVID, how to deal with all these things. So remember always the political calculus of being in government. And also sometimes what I will personally call the naivety of some of the leaders in not appreciating that there is so much fragility about this thing that if we go too far, we're going to break them up and it will be fragmentation and we could lose and then we could even lose further.
And Takumo Gunse, your party, unlike Kemraj party, walked from the coalition. And I'm posing the same question to you. What were the downsides of the coalition, given all the challenges that were raised by young Solomon and expanded on by Jeffrey?
You see, the WPA was in a very peculiar situation. I think the coalition, in terms of the parties that went to the polls, is the APMU plus AFC. And I think that the coalition, the relationship between the APMU and the AFC, even though it was not perfect, it was more respectful, okay, by the PNC than the PNC relationship with APMU parties. The AFC at any moment could have brought the government down. And I think that factor alone forced the PNC and President Granger at the time to be more respectful and to take the APMU, the AFC, much more serious than he took his partners in the APMU. Professor Jeffrey raised an issue on share governance. And he said that the WPA dropped the ball, basically. But he forget that from the very first year of the government, the WPA was complaining that it has no influence in terms of making policy. And in the context of that reality, we didn't feel it make much political sense for us to go out on a limb and fighting for share governance when you know it would not have any traction in the APMU and also in the APMU AFC coalition. Our judgment was that the PNC wasn't keen on that. And our judgment was that the AFC, with its newly discovered electoral strength and so forth, was not anxious to be axed by a share governance relationship with the PPP. So we felt that, look, the chances of having that in the APMU AFC coalition was very was almost hopeless. We could have took another position, say, look, principle is principle, and because we committed to that in the manifesto, then we should fight for it. But the WPA had to be mindful of the fact that we were not in a position organizationally on the ground. We're not in a position that we have access to a friendly media to wage the justification of us rocking the boat. And even after Comrade David Hines over time have been pressing us to press the coalition in a certain way, the executive was a bit reluctant because we believe that we couldn't come out of that, okay, in a way that make political sense for the party going forward. And we had to make sure that it is not the WPA would have been seen as the party that bring down the coalition. That the coalition, if it fall, it must fall from parties outside the WPA. Because the WPA felt that in these circumstances, if we did anything that entrenched the perception that we carry over the whole hostility to the PNC and the coalition, and it led to the bringing down of the coalition, we felt that it would be very difficult for us to recover from that position. So we rather to err on caution and take we blows, but don't make the mistake that history will read the WPA brought down the government. Now, I can't speak because the funny thing about the Granger administration, and it worried us from day one. He ran the cabinet. He ran the government basically from the cabinet, and the cabinet execute, and far we could see the cabinet make policy. In normal political situations, as we understand it, the parties who face the electorate, who mobilize to make the government possible, the responsibility to shape policies rests with the parties. And it is those policies that shaped by the parties is sent to the cabinet, and the cabinet, as the managers, will work out the best way to implement the decisions made by the parties. And I tell you, for 5 years, we have never had in the APMU any significant discussion on any policy. And the way in which they operate with the whip in parliament You got to go through the whip, except you're prepared to rock the boat and be a rebel in parliament and create the necessary tensions, which I point out you are trying to avoid. So we were not in a normal coalition situation. And we have had to bend backwards in order for the coalition and the APMU to survive. So I will say that the AFC is better placed to judge the relationship between themselves and the APMU. I am better placed to judge the relationship within the APMU. And I could tell you the relationship with the APMU is very dictatorial and very unhelpful to any successful coalition. Brother Solomon talked about ideology. I didn't sense any ideology coming from the PNC leadership at any level, on any matter. And when we struck the APMU, recognizing the history between the two parties, recognizing that within a coming together partnership or a coalition of other political parties, there are likely to be some problems. You have to be politically naive not to expect that. And we decided, look, if the WP and the PNC got problems, we don't want it to spill over automatically to the rest of the partnership, and we work out what we call a bilateral, the instrument of a bilateral. So if any of the two parties got a problem with anything, you could invoke the bilateral. We meet outside the APMU and we discuss the problems and we seek to resolve it. The WPA activated that on 2 occasions. On the first occasion, they came, Granger and a delegation from the PNC came. We state our position. They listened. They said they're going to get back to us. Months passed, years passed, they didn't get back to us. And then another problem developed. And the WP have a lot of discussions whether it makes sense to activate the bilateral again, knowing the very fact that even if they turn up, they ain't going to address anything. But the consensus in the executive was reached that give it another try. And we give it another try. They came, they listened, they promised to get back to us. They never get back to us. I make this to show you that, look, you got to, politics is about human beings. And don't care what structure you have. If the human condition, the human mindset, the human political culture is of such that it does not respect principle, it does not respect cordiality, it does not respect gentleman's agreement, it does not respect those things, don't care what structure you got a lot of problems. And I will say that we have learned certain things in the experience. Never again the WPA will enter into a coalition if I have any say without on a gentleman agreement. The PNC experience in the APMU have shown that the PNC is not a party that you could work with based upon gentleman agreement. You have to have something like what the AFC had, to bind them to something. But that alone wouldn't work. The AFC, to the extent that the AFC got a fair deal, is basically because they could have brought the government down by walking away. And for the WPA, we have the challenge of trying not to enter into a coalition simply based upon what we could bring to the coalition academically, what we could bring to the coalition in terms of political culture, what we could bring to the coalition in terms of technical skills. Parties don't have much respect for those things as is demonstrated in Guyana. The PNC will say we could buy any skill when we get power that the WPA could bring. So unless the WPA could walk over to build up a loyal constituency that represent even 3, 4, 5% of the votes, and is able to bring that to the table and could take it away from the table, I don't think that the WPA chances of being effective in a coalition with any political party at any side of the equation would make much sense. So for us, we have the burden to learn the lessons of the previous coalition, and we have to chart a course which is a commitment to coalition politics, because I think coalition politics are here to stay, and it will develop and continue to evolve. But for the WPA, we're in a unique situation because the last time we went in elections is by our own name is many moons ago. And you can't, unless the people you're dealing with is charitable, they will tell you that you bring nothing. And you have no way to fight that by saying, look, in the last elections, very recently, this is what we brought. Even though they know you brought something. They know that the PNC knew that the votes, the destruction that they got in 2006 elections, it's this WPA coming with them and building the APMU, help them to regain those seats. They know they couldn't do it by themselves. But despite that, they don't see it, as a major contribution made by the WPA and other small parties to the PNC success. And if one of the problems we have, in our view, is that we believe that if Robert Corbyn was the leader of the PNC and had emerged as the president, we believe that we would not have had the kind of problems we had under Mr. Granger. We're convinced about that. We feel, and we always suspect, that you're going to have problems with David Granger because his experience in politics is very limited. And everything we have been hearing about him was not good music. People were telling us that Granger is a very self-serving person. He's one-tracted. When he decides something, he sticks to it. People remind us about the mutiny, in the armed forces when he was at head, and Burnham had to pull him back into the office. So we were hearing a number of things because we're in the African community, and we hear all of these things. So we knew that there was an element in Granger that could lead to a lot of political problems. But we were hoping that the PNC would have learned its lessons and it would have able to, manage its new leader in a way that is more helpful to the coalition, the country. And I could tell you one of the things that we have pondered upon, when we came under pressure internally and abroad by WPA people, that how you are going to justify working with the PNC, we tell people that, look, the PNC or the Burnham and Hoyt Pier is not identically the PNC at present, and that there are some elements in the PNC which we feel are more progressive and we could work with them. But when the oppression of the WPA began in the APMU, and then it continued to the APMU AFC coalition, our comrades asked you, where the progressive in the PNC? Nobody come to defend you, even though we open out in public. Even Robert Corbyn, which is my good friend, the one excuse they give you because he was sick also along the line. But even from your sick bed, you could pen a few lines to say to your party, you're going on the wrong road, you're treating the WP and other small parties within the AFC, the APMU, badly. And many people don't know. After the dismissal of Rup Narayan from the Ministry of Education and a lot of tension developed in the APMU, we eventually forced Granger. He made a kind of compromise by saying, he appoint Corbyn to have discussions with all the APMU parties to see, what the problems are. And then Corbyn did an excellent report. He spoke to all the parties. And the same complaints that the WPA was making, every single party, including the PNC, made and is documented in the historical document called the Carvin Report. So the point I'm making here is that there's two factors I think is important for success. I agree with everybody who argue about the structural things, the constitutional limitations, and all of those are relevant things. But I still believe the human quality, the quality of our politicians, the political culture, is equally important. But above all of that, I believe, and the lesson I think we learned from the coalition is that if you don't have a population that is committed to coalition politics, not nominally, but profoundly they understand it, to be the defender of the coalition and coalition politics in Guyana will not go far. We are convinced that going forward is not simply a matter of constitutional reform, it's not simply a matter of better relationship between the parties and the party leaders. All of that is important, but our major lesson is that if we don't build in the populace a nimble population that understand the benefits of coalition politics, we're not going to get anywhere. Guyanese, the two parties have done a good work on us. When they squeeze you internally, where you complain, but nobody hearing when you're complaining, like a man beat up your wife in the house, busting out, bunging up your face and so. Why you want? Don't say nothing to nobody outside. No guy in this house. This house here, everything here is private. So the leaders will tell you, don't wash your dirty linens in public. And Guyanese population believe in that thing. When David and I and others were keeping noise about the APMU, we were facing a whole barrage of African people. Man, you must discuss them things inside. When we tell them, we try to discuss it inside, and we can't get a hearing. But you hear, man, but you can't wash your linens in public. The other side don't hear, and the other side don't know. But also, unless you have a population who is savvy enough to defend coalition politics and to put political leaders and parties under significant pressure by the way they vote, I don't think coalition politics will deliver to the Guyanese masses in terms of governance and in terms of economic transformation, which the country badly needs. I mean, I don't want to divert the program into those challenges. But if coalition politics is to be relevant, unless you have a committed section of the population to that, you aren't doing nothing much.
Shama Solomon, you have heard it. You have different perspectives. Kumo Gonse just said that, if the population is, if following some of the comments here, they said, WPA go for your own. Let the whole. I think that's a very important point that he's raising there. People still, I think, are not convinced that the coalition politics is the way to go because they think the big parties can win it on their own. And I think that's a very profound point. But Solomon, having heard all of that, are you still convinced that coalition politics is the politics of the future?
I am more convinced than ever at that times, and to your panelists. I think I say this because I am convinced at the level of even my party, the PNC. The point was made by some of the persons who spoke earlier about political accommodation. And I did say before that whether it is you question the sincerity of the desire of always existed with the PNC to share political space. That is historic in terms of reference. You can go back at every level. Even currently, however that is shaped, I take from the last presenter, it is how you use two things, in my opinion. First, your ability to interact with the grassroots. I think we are speaking coalition politics in the absence, especially now, where we have minority governments and one-seat majorities. We are taking the grassroots for granted. So, for example, we may take our Rastafarian brothers for granted, and we may say, how are we going to treat with them, or the sugar workers, or a group of people for granted, with reference to how we articulate, in fact, first agitate on their issues, and second, how we articulate those issues with regards to their interests. And I say take for granted because they make up those numbers. Now, coalition politics and the PNC. For parties, and I think the panel, the speaker before me made mention of the difference of respect for the WPA and the AFC. I owe that to infrastructure, and you can measure that in many ways about the political infrastructure that your party is bringing to the coalition with regards to, I heard culture, but institution as a whole. And I think you cannot take that for granted. You cannot take the membership of even a dominant party, for example, the PNC, for granted, of the sort of infrastructure that they already have and they have worked to build and they represent, and those institutions that they represent. So you cannot take that for granted. So for me, I think once we recognize those issues and appreciating the political culture of, in particular, the PNC with that desire. And people may say, but that desire is one where it is used for your own advancement. Well, that could be questioned, but nevertheless, it is there for you to take advantage of because it affords. And whether it's the difference of leadership, and I take that as a factor, how that is measured with regards to the leadership within the particular party and how they're advancing their positions, that is a factor. But you cannot not recognize that desire that is there for others to take advantage of. Whether it was the WPA in the APNU, they were given political space. You cannot not recognize that as important. It is how that was utilized. And we can debate how that was utilized. And secondly, not only given political space, but the opportunity of the political space in terms of how do you represent the issues or able to bring the issues of your constituency on board in that political space is important. So the first for me, coalition politics is a factor that stands as a pillar within the party that I represent. And not only at the individual level, and we see currently, however that plays out, the issue of what is internally taking place in the party itself with regards to how those dynamics are playing out and how people are representing their particular interests. Now, how does that translate to appreciating the issues and the ideas of other partners are important to the outcome, but nevertheless, it remains a pillar of the party to have the desire to work to engage others. So that's the first thing for me that says, as a representative or as someone who finds interest in the PNC, that exists. And secondly, in the society, we've seen from 2006, 2011, all the way to 2020, 2015 in particular, there is that desire in the society to want to see a different body politic and a different body culture of our politics. So that's the second thing that says to me, even as a young progressive, that we will have to take on board the ideas of others. We will have to take on board whether those are constituency ideas, whether they're individual ideas, constituency ideas, whether they're political party ideas, whether they're different ideologies. And I think we take the grassroots for granted, that they're not ideologically suave. Our Rasta brethren, that is an ideological position that may find value of 6 to 5,000 of voting population that you're going to win a seat with. How can you not take that on board as an issue that you want to work to build a broader coalition? Even to recognize how important it is to that constituency, like many other constituencies. And I think in our society right now, the appreciation by those constituencies, when you filter into the grassroots and you hear from them that you have to take those ideas, those issues on board, that says to you that you cannot work with one party domination. You have to build a coalition, even at the societal level.
Thank you very much, Solomon. And as we come down to program time, everyone will have a chance here to make their wrapping up remarks. I know, Dr. Jeffrey, you've been making a lot of notes, and you can speak to any issue that came up. You can respond to any of the panelists. So we'll start with you first, Jeffrey, then to Kemraj Okuma, and then Dr. Sharma Solomon to wrap us up. Hello? Yes, Jeffrey. Yes, go ahead. We're hearing you.
Yes. I was saying I'm not going to speak to all my notes, or else we'll have to go all of it. But let me just say this. Coalition politics is the natural course Guyana is taking. We must do everything in our power to see that it is not turned back by all kinds of manipulation. First thing. Secondly, the structure of what we have today needs to be changed. Let me point out quite clearly that in our kinds of society, as I said before, and I'm speaking here at Tokansai, there is no population, there are populations. There is no people to go with you. People go with the PNC and people go with the PPP. They're